Hey, sorry, hey there kiddos, it's me, and I am giving you a little bit of help with your percent homework tonight, because the way that we are solving percent problems in 6th grade is really using a proportion and using a model. When you get into 7th grade, you'll solve them more using math, using multiplication, which is probably the way your grown-ups are the most comfortable helping you. And since we're doing these math problems in a way that your grown-ups might not be familiar with, I wanted to make sure you had a little bit of help available from me. So let's start with this first problem here. What is 20% of 40? And for your homework tonight, I'm asking you to show this two ways. One way using a proportion and another way using a model. And it really doesn't matter which one you do first because you'll get the same answer both ways. So for this first problem, I'm just going to set up the proportion first. And when we're using this proportion to solve a percent problem, it is always the percent out of 100. Percents are always out of 100. So for this problem, the percent out of 100 is 20. So when I set up my proportion, I'm going to have 20 over 100 equals something out of 40. Well, if I look right here at these numbers, it's not really easy for me to tell what I did to 100 to make it a 40. So I'm going to erase my little thing here, and I'm going to set this up to play leapfrog, like we've been doing in class. All proportions are sets of or pairs of equivalent ratios. So if I rewrite it so that this looks more familiar, I can still solve it the same way. I'm just going to write this down here. 20 over 100 equals something out of 40. Okay. So I'm looking for a number that's going to play really, really nicely with 100 and 40 so that I can figure out what I'm going to use here to kind of leapfrog between these two ratios. So I think the number that's going to play nicest with 100 and 40 is probably going to be 20. Because if I divide 100 by 5, I get 20. Well, because I need to write an equivalent ratio, I also need to divide 20 by 5. And when I divide 20 by 5, I get 4. So now I'm going to scale up. To go from 20 to 40, I had to multiply by 2. So to do the same thing here, 4 times 2, that's going to give me an 8. So the answer, if I'm looking at this like an official proportion, 20 over 100 is equal to 8 out of 40. Well, that same answer right here can also be proven with a model. Now, in your MSG, you have a couple different options for a model to use. So you can use the one that you like the best. But to be honest with you, the model I prefer, like the one that works best for my math brain, is a tape diagram. So I'm going to draw my little tape diagram here. My top portion here is going to model percents. And percents are always out of 100. So that top region of my diagram is going to go up to 100%. And because I know the total for this problem, it asked me what is 20% of 40. I know my total is 40. Okay? That's my whole number. This whole thing right here at the bottom represents 100. Excuse me. The top portion represents 100 because of the percent. The bottom portion represents 40 because 100% of 40 is 40. So this is that whole number right there. Because I'm looking for a 20% piece, and I know 20% is 1/5 of something, I'm going to cut this into 5 pieces. And I want to try to get them close to equal, but it doesn't really matter if they're perfectly equal or not. Because 1/5 of something is 20%, and if you look back at that diagram that we put in your MSG, you'll see this part there. 100 divided by 5 is 20. Each one of these portions represents 20%. And if I divide 40 by 5, because I need to fill those little boxes, 40 divided by 5 is 8. So each 20% portion is 1/5 of 40. And 1/5 of 40 is 8. So looking at the proportion and looking at the model, both times you get 8 as your answer. Well, let's look down here at our second problem. Again, we're going to show this two different ways. One time with the model and another time with a proportion. And the question that we're trying to answer is, what is 60% of 30? Well, you know what? This time I think I'm going to do a model first, just to show you that you can solve these either way. So, and for this model, I'll go ahead and use a number line. Number lines might work better for some of your brains. Now, I'm not trying to be confusing and showing you a lot of different ways to solve the same problem. You don't have to solve it all of these ways. I just want to show you that there's more than one approach. So if you don't really like this top model up here, you might prefer the number line model. So 60% of 30. Well, my percents are always out of 100. And in this case, the whole number, the total number is 30, and 0% of anything is 0. Well, if I'm looking for 60%, I can find that by 20, 40, 60, 80, and there's 100%, okay? So here's my 20%, here's 40%, here's 60%, here's 80%. My 100% is down here. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I need to divide 30 by 5 to figure out how much each 20% increment is worth. So there's going to be 6, there's 12, there's 18, there's 24, and there's my 30 right there at the end. So 60% of 30 is 18. And if this is the model that you prefer, this is the model that you can show. Okay, and that kind of makes sense because 60% of something should be more than half, right? And because 50% of something is half, so since half of 30 would be 15, it makes sense that 60% of 30 is a little bit more than that. Let's look at that same problem over here with the proportion. Now, I'm going to leave myself room this time to kind of do my little leapfrog thing. My proportion for this problem is always the percent over 100. Well, for this problem, that percent is 60. 60 over 100 is equal to something over 30, right? 60 over 100 is something out of 30. And to figure out the number that needs to go up there, I'm going to need to play leapfrog. Now I know from doing this right here the number's going to be 18, but let's prove it with the math, okay? So if I'm looking here at 130, I know a number that's going to play very nicely with both of them because it's their greatest common factor is going to be 10. Well, if I'm going from 100 to 10, in order to get to that number, I had to divide by 10. So for you to keep those ratios equivalent, you need to divide the top number by 10 as well. And in this case, the top number is 60, and 60 divided by 10 is 6. Okay, well now to go from 10 to 30, I needed to multiply. 10 times 3 is 30. And in order for you to get to that number up there at the top, in order for you to write an equivalent ratio, you need to do the same thing to this term on the top. And 6 times 3 is going to give you 18. So no matter which way you solve the problem, you landed 18 for your answer. 60 over 100 is equivalent to 18 over 30. Let's do this last one. Now, you still have two problems on the back, but let's do these problems together. This last two with the proportion and the model. I want to figure out what 75% of 48 is. And I want you to show this problem two ways. Well, I think this time I might set my proportion up first. So 75 over 100. Because that percent sign, remember, percents are fractions, so this really means it's a fraction over 100, is equal to something out of 48. And since it's not very easy for me to tell what I did to 100 to make it a 48, I'm going to set up my little spot down here so that I can play leapfrog with common factors. That will make it easier for me to solve this problem. When I look at 100 and 48, I know they're not both divisible by 10, because that doesn't end in a 0. I know that they're both divisible by 2, because they're both even. But another number they're both divisible by is going to be 4. 100 is divisible by 4, and 4 is also a factor of 48. So the number I'm going to play leapfrog with right here, between those two terms, their greatest common factor, is going to be 4. Well, to go from 100 to 4, if you think about it almost, kind of like quarters, 4 pieces of 100, I had to divide by 25. 100 divided by 25 will give me 4. So to write an equivalent ratio, I need to divide 75 by 25. Well, 75 divided by 25 is going to give me 3. So now, I'm going to try to scale from 4 to 48. Well, to go from 4 to 48, I had to multiply that term by 12. And in order for you to write an equivalent ratio, you have to multiply that top term by 12 as well. And that will give you 36. So, 75% of 48 is 36. These two ratios, these are proportional, they are equivalent. Let's show that same thing here with a model. So, I'm going to take my model. Now, this is just the one that I prefer. You don't need to use this model. This model just makes just a little bit more sense to me. I'm going to take that tape diagram, I'm going to divide it in half. The top portion represents percents, and percents always are going to go from 0 to 100. Now I know for this problem, my whole number, all of it, is 48. And 0% of any number will always be 0. Now I'm looking for 75% of this number. And if you look back at your MSG, the best way to get to 75% is to cut our model into pieces that each hold 25%. So if I'm looking up here at the top, because 100 divided by 4, here each portion represents 25% of the total, I had to cut that into 4 pieces. Well, when I divide 48 by 4, each one of these portions is going to hold 12. Because 48 divided by 4 is 12. So if I'm looking to see what 75% of this number is, of 48 is, looking here at my model, I'm looking at this portion here. That's almost all of it. 75% is most of it. And 12, 24, 36. So either way, you get 36 for your answer. This way with a proportion, and that way with your model. The two problems on the back of your assignment, there they are, the 80% of 55 and 70% of 140. Try those on your own. We'll check them tomorrow in class. And as always, you can use your MSG to help you. See you tomorrow, kiddos.